Hey there, friend. Welcome back to Daily Dose Radio here in the Bible Bistro. And if you're watching this over YouTube, you can tell that we've taken the Bible Bistro outside. We're on the Bible Bistro patio today. And we have been all this week. Next week, I'll record back in the office again. But I thought, with the first Psalm, might as well just do something different and special. And boy, it's been nice out. So I thought we'd record here on the patio. So we've looked at this week, Psalm 1, and we've looked at the first half, which is the first 3 verses. That's the blessed man. Now we come to the other part, the opposite, the ungodly man. Now today we're going to read verses 4 and 5, and tomorrow verse 6. Verse 6 is the conclusion. But I want you to notice verses 4 and 5 and how they reflect what happened in the first 3 verses. Not everything, but, it's like what we saw in the first 3 verses. And, well, I'll tell you what, let me just read the passage, verses 4 and 5, and then we'll just jump right into it. So verse 4, the ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. Okay, well, that's verses 4 and 5. And you can already see that we have some things that are very much like what we read in the first 3 verses. So we have a similitude right off. The ungodly are not so. Well, that tells us that this is just the opposite from the blessed man. The ungodly man, he isn't blessed. He doesn't meditate on the law of the Lord. And he's like something, but it's not a tree. And we jump right into that similitude here in verse 4, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Well, what's the chaff? The chaff is that outer shell on wheat or barley or any grain, really. And in ancient times, they would gather in the grain, sheaves and all, and then they would beat the grain. They would take the sheaves and they would beat them on a hard stone surface. Usually they would have a platform made, laid with all kinds of stone there, and maybe with a little cover over the top for the workers, but it would be built up on a hillside, on top of a hill, because the wind would come across that hill, and they would beat the grain for the grain to come out, and then they would toss the grain up in the air, and the air would grab the chaff, which was loose on the grain, and would blow it off. And the grain would fall back down into the pile, and then they'd take their winnowing fork, and they'd do it again. They'd throw it up in the air, the wind would catch it, and blow the chaff out, and the grain would fall back to the ground. The chaff was that dead shell that the grain grew in, but now because it's harvest time, all that is gone. Just the grain now is what they want, and so the chaff, being dead, unable to propel itself or grow itself or be alive at all, is just forced to be blown about, and so when he says the ungodly are like the chaff which the wind drives away, that was a very specific illustration of what these men were. The ungodly are dead. They're driven by the wind. They cannot drive themselves because they're dead. Well, Paul tells us that in the second chapter of Ephesians, right? When he says that we're dead in trespasses and sin. So we have no driving force of our own before we come to Christ. So the ungodly are not so, but they're like chaff. It's dead. It gets blown away. It's useless. Verse 5, therefore, the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment. Okay, well, what did it say about the blessed man? It said that he doesn't stand in the way of sinners. Here, the ungodly will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. So look at verse 1. Nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. So the blessed man doesn't stand with the sinners, and the sinners will not be found standing in the congregation of the righteous. So you see the parallelism here. The ungodly are the opposite. They're not like a tree that grows. They're like chaff that's dead that gets blown away. And just like the blessed man doesn't stand in the way of the sinner, so the sinner's not going to stand in the congregation of the righteous because he's not one. He's not a member of the righteous, of the congregation. So, verses 4 and 5 give us the plight of the ungodly. This is how it is for them, which is sad, really. It's very sad. Okay, well, join me tomorrow. We're going to look at verse 6. And in verse 6, we have a conclusion to the matter. So I hope you join me then here on Daily Dose Radio.